Hello, welcome to the Gay Liberation Network on CAN TV. This is a live call-in show that this evening we'll be talking about ending rape culture. Gay Liberation Network is a direct action group based here in Chicago that advocates for all of our people in solidarity across labor and women's rights, LGBT rights. We've participated in a variety of actions that call attention to the culture, the sickness that we have here in the United States with regard to rape, as well as other types of sexual violence. And so tonight on our show, we have a special guest from Rape Victim Advocates, Brendan Yukins.
Thank you so much for having me, Brent.
Glad to have you and be talking about this important topic for all of us. So because of how LGBT people present ourselves, sometimes in our dress and in ways different than the society at large, this is an important topic for LGBTs, as well as, of course, for women and men throughout the entire society, as well as sometimes our gender appearance. Can cause people to think that they have power over us. Other types of sexual violence that are going on right now, LGBTs, gay men particularly experience this as a fear with prison, and there's lots of jokes in our society about sexual violence being an aspect of being in prison for crimes, and so that is an aspect of the sickness that we have going on here. Recently also I've heard of some cases of folks via hookups, with online, dates, because we're now doing blind dates pretty regularly. And as you do those hookups, sometimes the situation can become violent. So these are the things that we're going to talk about this evening here with Brendan from Rape Victim Advocates.
Wonderful. Well, absolutely. I think we're off to a great start in talking about the issue. The first thing that I want to touch on is exactly what you said about power. Oftentimes there is a large myth out there that sexual violence, particularly rape, is sex that started out consensual and then turned wrong, or something happened, or the person was carried away. And what we know is that sexual violence is actually about power and control. It's about one person being able to say, no, I have complete domination over this person's body. And when we're thinking about our own identity as gay men, or as anyone that identifies in the LGBTQ spectrum, we have to also look at what society is telling us we have power over. A lot of times those really harsh stereotypes directly correlate to the sexual violence that gay men and other people in the spectrum experience. So, for example, the stereotype that gay men are hypersexual and always want sex makes it really difficult for gay men to report when they're sexually assaulted. So hopefully with our conversation today about consent, we're able to break down a few of those myths and answer a few questions that people have.
So as you see on your screen here, consent is 4 things. It is clear, it is coherent, it is willing, and it is ongoing. And we're going to break down each of those 4 things. We have a caller, so let's take the call. Hello, welcome to the Gay Liberation Network.
Yes, sir, thank you. This is a great show that I watch all the time. But the thing is, rape, wherever it occurs, is wrong. Prison, anywhere else. But the thing is that when this Harvey Weinstein was so powerful that he had, what is the count, 25 so far, and there's more. He had so much power that nobody in Hollywood will turn him in. In fact, he has a paragraph in his contract saying that as long as he paid the people out of his pocket, no problem. But what gets me is this. How can we stop all of this? Like I have 2 transgenders in my family. I have 4 gay men. I have 2 lesbians. And I talk to them all the time about this. And they says, you're right, because rape is wrong no matter where it occurs, but nobody wants to turn the people in about, talk about rape. So you got to get these people talking about rape, about how to stop it, the signs of what's going to happen. Because you 2 guys are knowledgeable, I could tell. Mm-hmm. So please.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much for your
call.
How
to stay away from it. Thank you.
Yeah, and much appreciated. We did want to touch on that, the Harvey Weinstein, circumstance out there, as well as, there's issues with our president, and there's been lots of high-profile sexual harassment and sexual violence cases out there. One thing that the caller brought up was that within the gay and lesbian relationships, as well as other relationships in the LGBT community, I've heard that there's these statistics that actually we have a higher prevalence than society at large at having violent, domestic abuse and violence in our lives. So of course that's going to affect our sexual relations as well.
Yeah, I really love that you brought up a lot of the celebrity cases that we're seeing. So, and we can obviously see power in those relationships. If you have a major Hollywood mogul who is able to sexually intimidate people, that's one sort of power. And a lot of times it's very easy to look at that person and say, oh, well, that celebrity has a lot of power, and that's how they were able to get away with either sexual harassment or sexual violence. More generally, sexual violence is the umbrella term, so it incorporates stalking, domestic violence, sexual harassment, as well as sexual assault and sexual abuse. Something that I think we need to focus on as well is what power dynamics do we see here at home? So I can't call Harvey on the phone and tell him to stop doing all the sexual harassment that he was doing. But what are some power dynamics that I know that I see in my own community? How have I made it so that, for example, if I have another friend who is a gay man, and I notice that he gets really jealous about his boyfriend and is always accusing him of sleeping around, even if he's not, or if they have an open relationship, that one person has more of an open relationship than the other person, and there's not that communication happening. Those are some sort of power differences that we can address in our own community, and we really have the chance to make an impactful change there.
So this consent is a great tool for us. So there's 4 aspects of consent: clear, coherent, willing, and ongoing. Mm-hmm. And the first one is clear, that the consent is active. Tell us what that active clearness means.
Sure. So when we think about consent is another word for permission. So I consent to go to dinner with somebody. I consent for somebody to give me a kiss on the lips, right? The first thing about it is that it has to be active and clear. That means that you're actually telling the person what's about to happen, right? It's very, very different to say, may I have a kiss, than can we do anal, right? It's very different to say, can we do vaginal versus can we do anal? And those are things that we need to feel a little bit more comfortable talking about. Silence is never a yes. Something that often happens is when people are in a sexual situation, they feel very vulnerable. And so it's really difficult to actually say to somebody no, particularly if you do love this person, particularly if this person is someone who has, in other situations, been there for you during a tough or a vulnerable time. We have to always keep that power in mind and rebalancing it. What are you doing to make sure that your partner is comfortable enough that you can have these open conversations about, I'm interested in this, I'm not interested in this?
Right. And So, along with this power thing, when you can have joyful sex that and that joy is brought out by using this tool of clear communication consent. So we don't want to create fear around this sex. There's already enough fear that blocks the communication. We want to focus on everybody having a joyful experience and clearly communicating. There is a caller, so we would like to talk to the caller.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, what's your name?
Dennis.
Welcome to the show, Dennis.
I had a couple of comments since the topic seems to be somewhat focused on straight males, which I am. You mentioned Harvey Weinstein, but I think and it's wrong, but there are worse examples. First of all, look at somebody like Bill Cosby, where he drugged people. Weinstein didn't drug them. I mean, some of those women did walk out. So, you can say there's pressure, but people do have free will. So keep an open mind about that before you're too condemning of the man. But Cosby raped people, and then look at Bill Clinton. I think anybody who's being honest knows that he used his political office over his career, maybe not to the same volume as the other two that I've mentioned, but everybody knows that he, got over on women because he was a powerful politician. And another comment I would like to make, you said that people who make jokes about jail rape as part of a sickness. I think that's carrying it a little bit too far. I think it's in bad taste to make those type of jokes. I don't think it's a sickness. Everybody blows off a little steam and makes a joke in private with their friends who they know they're accepting. If you purposely do it, getting up in somebody's face and make a joke about it, to bother them, well, that's wrong. But again, I think we all make jokes at times in private, and I wouldn't want to see anybody say that anybody's sick for making a joke like that, because I think all of us at times have made a joke in bad taste. So, kind of quantifying it as a sickness, I think, goes a little overboard. But, you have to look at the broad scope of things in rape. You really have to make sure it's rape, because in all honesty, there are going to be women out there that are going to cry rape if they know that there's money involved, and sometimes there's a willingness there that later on they feel bad about, but for various reasons they will describe it as rape, even though I think that if any of us were privy to the occasion and knew exactly what was going on, would probably not see it as rape. It's some women like men to be aggressive. So again, I think you have to really be careful when you approach the subject of rape, because sometimes unless it really meets the legal criteria of it and people are judged in a court of law, I think we all have to kind of be very cautious when we use that term. But I do think it's interesting that, you brought up that that occurs across all cultures. And speaking from a straight perspective, I think that, again, there are people that have done a lot worse than Mr. Weinstein, and, of course, he's going to be in a whole heck of a lot of trouble for that. But thank you for taking my call, and you guys have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. In the show, we're trying to talk about different ways of communicating to ensure that we don't have misunderstandings at the minimum, which seems to be what you're advocating here, and also that we can hear people so that they don't feel victimized afterward, that they feel like they've had a joyful experience and weren't the victim of a power play.
And I would love to just address some things that you brought up, because I do think that there are some things that are coming up that are great to address. The first of which is a concept that we usually call victim blaming. So whenever something violent occurs to another person, it is our natural inclination to blame that person for what's happened to them. And we do it to protect ourselves, right? If I'm able to say, for example, that this person was raped because they were wearing a skimpy dress, or this person was raped because they were out at night and they were drunk, what I'm doing is I'm making myself feel more secure. I'm saying, I'm not that person. I dress conservatively, and I go out at a reasonable hour. What's interesting is that sexual violence can happen to anyone, and that's a really scary reality. 85% of the time or more, usually it's not a stranger. It's not somebody who's going to jump out of the bushes. It is somebody that you're in a relationship with, or somebody that you know personally. And when we're thinking about Harvey Weinstein and the jokes as well, which I think is another great thing to bring up, is that it creates the culture in which we live. If we're able to sit and joke about rape, I'm kind of telling my friends that it's okay, right? That it's not that bad or it's not that serious, that somebody was sexually assaulted. Even if it's just sexual harassment over time makes people leave their jobs, right? So we always have to make sure that regardless of where on the spectrum of sexual violence something is, we're still being attuned to it and we're still checking it among our friends.
And so our comment of our tool of being clear is valuable here. There's a slogan that we've used at some marches that is yes, no means no, no matter what I wear, no matter where I go.
Oh, I like that one.
So yes and no are pretty clear. The next tool that we have is that it needs to be coherent. So
Yeah.
talk about coherent consent.
Absolutely. So coherence, the first and foremost, means people that are incapacitated by drugs or alcohol cannot give consent. Now, there's a difference between a glass of wine and a box of wine. And oftentimes they'll get the question, well, how drunk is too drunk? I had a glass of wine and then we had sex. Does that mean I was raped? And the reality is when someone is incapacitated, that's our key word there. So if somebody is unconscious, obviously they can't give consent. If somebody is drunk enough that they're in a position where they can say, just punch me in the face, it'll be great, right? That person obviously, even though they're asking you to do it, would you be a good friend if you punched them in the face? Probably not. And that's the same way about sexual assault, is that you were able to see when people are beyond the point where they're able to comprehend the action that they're agreeing to.
Yeah, thanks. So the next point that we have here to talk about consent is that it needs to be willing by both parties.
Yeah, so willing is the part of consent that I can talk about for hours. I won't because it's a short show. But when we talk about willing, it means that the person is giving consent without force or without threat of force. Now, we can expand this a little bit. If we're talking about a relationship where there's been intimate partner violence, consent gets very dicey. I was at a very reputable institution that was a bar that had a leather dungeon beneath it, which I'm so glad we can talk about this on television in the modern day and age. And there was two men who were next to me. And one of them was pushing the other one up against the bar and trying to pull down his pants, which immediately put up some red flags for me because the leather dungeon is downstairs. Up here, it's just RuPaul's Drag Race, right? So the guy is saying, no, no. And I leaned over and I said, hey, boys, keep it fun, but keep it consensual, okay? And he blows up. And he said, how dare you talk to me about this? And I said, I just want to make sure we're all having a fun time. So I go into the bathroom, and lo and behold, his boyfriend, who had been saying no, follows me in. And tears are running down his face. And he says, you're the first person to ever say something. I'm actually from San Salvador. He's taken my passport, and I can't get out. And that's when we have to start seeing all the different power dynamics that were coming into play, right? We're in a small community, but we're also in a community that sometimes doesn't often respond to people of color or people that have immigration needs. When I saw that domestic violence happening, it really made me think about how consent is willing. And even though no one was punching him and nobody had a weapon, there was some still really powerful power dynamics that were making sure that he couldn't say no.
Yeah. And that was also the case with the Weinstein situation that's going on in the news right now. So willingness is important to having a fun time. The fourth tool that we'll give you this evening is ongoing, that the consent needs to be ongoing.
Absolutely. So consent needs to be granted every time and for any action. So we talked about this before in terms of one-on-one. I think sometimes it's fun to even make it into a game. Like, ooh, do you want to do this next? Ooh, that's sexy. Do you want to do this next? Ongoing could even look like, does that feel good? Is that okay? Obviously, if someone is saying, ow, that hurts, and we're not talking BDSM, we're just talking that they're physically hurting in their body, it's obviously a time to stop.
So checking in.
Absolutely.
Okay. So when this does not occur, when you do not have consent, when it's not clear, when it's not coherent, when it's not willing, when it's not ongoing, after that has occurred and has not been, hopefully it can be through communication we can flesh these things out and avoid troubles. But after that, unfortunate circumstances has occurred. What kinds of things do you recommend that people do?
Sure. Well, the first thing that I will say is that it's not your fault. A lot of times when we speak of consent, we're leaving out the fact that rape is premeditated. A lot of times it's not about a lack of communication. Oftentimes the person who was raped was communicating the entire time, and still that person was disrespecting their wishes. And so what we always say when you call our hotline, first and foremost, is, I believe you.
We've got the hotline on the screen.
Absolutely. And that it's not their fault that this happened, even though a lot of times society implies or says outright that it was, and that they have options. We're never going to force you into anything. We're not going to force you to file a police report. We're not going to force you to go to the hospital or do a rape kit. Those are all options that are available. But we want to make sure that that power is given back to somebody so that they never feel, again, like they're being forced into a situation that they don't want to be in.
And moreover, I think it's fair to say that you'll believe them when they tell you their story. So as you call in to Rape Victim Advocates, you've got someone who wants to believe your story. And Dennis, the caller that called in earlier, I would say that's the pushback I would have on the comments that you had, that we need to just take people at their word.
Absolutely.
And believe them, especially in a time when they're feeling like their words have not been heard.
And that's actually a really good point to bring in, because we also know that out of every other traumatic incident that can happen to somebody, that sexual violence has the highest rates, 33% for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason why that rate is so high, higher than war veterans, higher than natural disasters, is because a lot of times what people are hearing every single day is that, oh, they made it up. Oh, they cried rape. Oh, they're the ones that are somehow to blame. And that actually makes their trauma worse. It's roughly about as traumatizing being stabbed and surviving it as it is surviving a rape. And so we do want to believe people so that we're not making them even more miserable and lonely than they are right now.
Services available throughout the city. Rape Victim Advocates has a variety of offices.
Yeah, and I'll just say in closing that if you're somebody who has experienced sexual violence of any type, please feel free to call in to the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline. Their number is up here on the screen. It's 1-888-293-2080, or you can visit our website at rapevictimadvocates.org, and there are people that can help.
Great. Thank you very much, Brendan, for participating in the show.
My pleasure.
Rape Victim Advocates is an advocate for all of us. We have some announcements of events coming up and demonstrations that we will be participating in to create a better world, including a world that ends rape culture. There's a rally for abortion rights tomorrow. From 11 to 2, it's near Diversey and Western. From 11 to 2 tomorrow. And on Tuesday, there's going to be a classroom type of session to help us understand each other across gender lines and build a trans-affirming community. Come learn about your pronouns from 6:30 to 8:30 in Evanston. Next Friday, as part of our international efforts to bring about LGBT liberation throughout the world, we have a special guest, Gaspar Sanchez from Honduras, that will be speaking with us at Loyola University. He's an indigenous person and brings his respect for the earth, as well as a gives us some frameworks to be able to better relate between land and people. 7 o'clock on Friday. The Uptown Tent City was recently moved out of its covering there in the viaduct at Wilson and the Lakeshore Drive. One of the Andy Thayer, who's been one of the active activists with this with the Tent City, will be talking about why do Chicago leaders hate the homeless and the various rules that have been placed on them, as well as how that affects all of us as people who live in the city of Chicago and this world. So check that out next Saturday.